welcome to McSwain Guitars, and it is a mess because it's like every time I build something, I'm just a disaster. And then I clean it up, and then I start over, and it just becomes a mess all over again. So
building custom guitars by hand is a challenge for any luthier, but for Stephen McSwain, working with exotic tone woods is only half the battle. For him, the other half is cutting, welding, colouring, and aging metals like aluminium. Then adding rivets and inlaying spent 44 Magnum cartridge cells. I love it. And he's coming in now all the way from the northwest of the USA up there in Portland, Oregon. Hello, Stephen, and welcome to the show.
Hello, Lars. How are you, my friend? As you said, from Portland, Oregon, I had to wear my, represent the state, so.
It's great. It's great to have you on the show. Now, before we talk about guitars, what's more important, or seems to be an underlying theme of our USA special, is the weather where our guests are located. Now, Portland is pretty close to the latitudes and the latitudinals to the UK on the planet. Each time I've been there, especially Seattle, it's always raining. So what's it like there this morning?
Well, today the weather, Lars, is as exactly as you would expect. Gray, cold, and dreary. However, it has been very beautiful the past few weeks. We're in what they're calling a drought. So we've had some really incredible weather, which is very uncharacteristic of the Pacific Northwest.
Well, it's been persistently raining here for 2 weeks, non-stop. Now, your latest guitar creations are really impressive, but before we look at them in detail, let's go right back to when we first met in the 90s, when you were crafting by hand some very clever off-the-wall guitars in your garage, featuring themes that included, amongst others, dragons, skulls, Frankenstein, and Dracula. And of course, those were the early days of Stephen McSwain guitars. At that time, were you a frustrated guitar maker with a day job who wanted to do nothing else but make guitars? How did you turn professional?
I think you hit the nail on the head with that. I actually was a very frustrated guitar builder / musician with a day job, and I was just dreaming of a way out, and I just kept at it and kept at it and kept at it. I absolutely love what I do, and I love that I get to do what I love to do as a quote unquote job. And I finally just stayed at it. And, where we met was the NAMM show, for those who are watching, which is the National Association of Music Merchants, a huge convention that's held in Anaheim, California in January of every year, minus last year, thanks to COVID, where builders and musicians and anything you can possibly imagine to do with music comes together for about 4 or 5 days, and everybody's looking at everybody's wares and buying and selling, and so I had brought some things to that, and a Japanese company, distribution company, called Hotline Music Corporation, bought enough guitars to where it was more than I was making at my year's salary selling steel, and I looked at it like winning the lottery, and I just pulled the plug on the day job and took a leap of faith and decided this is what I was gonna do until I couldn't do it anymore, and here it is some 23 years later and I'm still doing it.
Junkman from VintageRock.com, and we're here at NAMM 2017. And today we're going to be talking to Stephen McSwain from McSwain Guitars, right?
Yes, sir.
Based out of Portland, Oregon, I do believe?
As of October 2014, yes. By way of LA for about 20 years. So.
You got some really special looking guitars.
Tell
us a little bit about your products.
Well, basically, I've been building since about 1991. I started by buying just a guitar body and carving faces in it. And as we're here at NAMM, it all brings things full circle. Steve Vai has that guitar that I first carved because by way of NAMM, I got Steve's number and sent him that guitar. So, of course, instant, credibility.
Yeah, there you go. Right?
Then Alice in Chains got a couple, then Korn got a couple, and Living Colour, and on and on.
Fantastic. And now, of course, Stephen McSwain guitars are respected by players around the world and recognized for the metal-fronted designs.
I think how I evolved into the metal was when I moved to Los Angeles. I started doing a lot of subcontract work for Schecter guitars and ESP guitars and a bunch of other different companies. And Mike Tempesta, who is now with Fender Music Corporation, was playing with the band Powerman 5000 at that point. And he was an endorsee of Schecter guitars. And we got together and he said, could you do something like this? And he had shown me a picture of an older metal guitar that I think Billy Gibbons had. And I said, well, yeah, I never say no. And then, you always try, and if you fail, then you say sorry. So, but I decided that I was going to give this a go. I found some really cool metal. There was an old aerospace junkyard, basically, and you can go and kind of shop and look for old parts off planes. It's called Apex in Los Angeles. And I still do business with them today and still get parts and the old VU meters and things like that, the metal top guitars. But I had gotten a gauge, several gauges, and we did a limited run. I think it was about 10 guitars for Schecter that were all basically one of a kind because they had different little wear patterns in them. That was the beginning of the metal part. And then I looked at it and I said, well, all these other pieces of old aircraft aluminum that are sitting in this junkyard, I can grab some of that and incorporate it into my other designs that I wanted to do. And this was about the time I started coming up with my own shapes, headstock designs, and really just ran with it.
Brilliant. Lovely stories. I mean, all your models are very much hands-on within the construction. And like I said earlier, from creating the designs, the artwork, and cutting the aluminium sections and colouring. Actually, as this is the USA special, I should make an attempt to say aluminum.
Yeah. Sorry, my security system hopped up in my lap, so this is Aussie. So my apologies. Yeah, there are some little tricks that I've used over the years and learned to kind of expedite the building process, because when I first started doing this, especially with the flags, I chose aluminum, as you blokes say over in the UK, because it's a softer, lighter metal, hence being aircraft, are built out of it. And so I would buy these sheets and I would have to cut every single little section and drill every little nail and screw and rivet hole. And that is incredibly time consuming, which I love doing, but it doesn't really, work out when you're trying to pay the bills. So I have found a couple different laser cutters and water jet cutters that help speed the process along. And so I will get a couple pieces that, are already roughly cut and have the sections, and then I'll go back and assemble them into the guitar. My favorite part of it is then making the patinas and getting it just looking like it's 100 years old or been through, 15 aerial dog fights and bullet holes have shot in it. It's hard to recreate that. I mean, it takes a lot of time, and there again, it's like you learn the tricks and what ages the metal and how to get it just right where it's not too much or too little and it looks authentic. So I've practiced that and I learn something new every single time I do it.
I've always liked metal and rivets, and like you say, there's an essence of vintage USA aviation somewhere in there. I mean, cutting up aeroplanes to make guitars, it's wonderful, isn't it? And it looks like you're welding or soldering the aluminum sections together. And I'm going to put on my engineering hat now and say, how do you do that? Because am I correct in thinking you need an enormous amount of heat to solder aluminum, as it's an alloy?
As the old saying goes, you don't want to see how the sausage is made, Lars. No, I figured out a way to do it where it's one of my quote-unquote trade secrets. It's not rocket science, but I figured out a way to do it where I can get it seamed together with relatively low heat. And it works like a charm, and it gives it a real clean edge. A lot of times I liken it to lead glass, like mosaic lead glass. It's kind of in that same sort of vein.
Yeah, works like a charm, like you say, it does, and it looks stunning. And I like the way instead of wood, you use this metal to bind the necks, bodies, and headstocks. There's a lot of it, but as it's a light metal, you're not going to come off stage with a backache.
You're exactly right, Lars. One of the things that I've actually got a patent on. We affectionately call the tone layer, which on some of the earlier models when I first started doing it, it's literally a channel that is about 1 millimeter thick underneath, and it has you only see the binding, which goes around the fretboard, and then the fretboard that gets glued and screwed to the neck, and then the fretboard gets epoxied into the tone layer channel, and then you radius it and fret it, and it just gives it a really clean look. But what was an interesting after effect of that was that thin layer of aluminum between the fretboard wood and the neck wood added so much resonance and so much more sustain to the guitar that it was a cool thing that I wanted to incorporate in every guitar. So that's when I looked into getting it patented. One of the other types, and that's extremely expensive to have that manufactured. So one of the things to at least get it in a little more palatable pricing for the customer is I had some of the tone layer binding water jet cut, which doesn't create heat. I tried to have it laser cut with a thin aluminum. It just curls up and you can't use it. So with the water jet cutting, you have a perfect little cut strip, and then I'll heat the edges and mold it around a template that I have for the fretboard, and then affix that to the fretboard. So that also transfers a lot of reverberation and sustain into the body. So like you said, you have the headstock metal, the fretboard metal, and then the body metal, where all the underneath is wood, where it's tone chambered and set neck. So you get the warmth from the wood, but you get this brightness and punch from the metal. So that's one of the things that I've developed over many years, and it's just been it was a kind of a happy mistake.
Very interesting, and it's what we need to know behind the scenes of making these guitars. On your website, Steve, I think you offer around 30 different models, all based on just 2 body shapes.
That was where I wanted to keep the body shape really simple, and not have a million different shapes. It gets a little confusing at that point. We have the larger body shape, which we call the SM2, which is either a flat top with the contours or a carved top with the contours. Also, all the guitars are set neck.
Of copper on the top of that, which is adhered to it, and seamed together with wire in the form of hot rod flames. And Arcane split coil pickups, Tone Pros bridge with the strings through the body. You can see it's nice distressed black.
And then the SM1 is the smaller body, which is akin to about the size of a Les Paul. Again, flat top, which is about 1.5 inches thick, to a carved top, which is more in the 1 7/8 inches thick. I guess when you look at it, there are about 30 different models within the flag series, which you have basically any kind of flag you would want to do. Like I do an American flag that is the traditional red, white, and blue. We call the red, white, and bullets because it has the bullet shells and the cast stars, either the bullet stars or the skull stars, which I put on a model we call the black flag, which is black and silver distressed. We have the Union Jack, of course, honoring you guys. And, there's a million different flags that you could use. I've even done a different version of a guitar with a skull and crossbones. There's the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas line, which is one of my favorites, and that's a complete departure from the carved guitars as well as the metal guitars. The interesting thing about that is I've always been a fan of Hunter S. Thompson's writings, and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas is one of the most ridiculous books ever contrived. And I loved Ralph Steadman's artwork, and so I reached out to Ralph through his website and got in touch with his agent and said, I would love to do a line of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas guitars and license 6 different prints from Ralph. Ralph gets a commission on each one that I sell, and so the very first one went to Slash. I had become friends with Slash, and he had bought a guitar from me before, and he saw this one and he said, I want that, and I said, great, let's talk about it. So cut him a little bit of a deal on it, and he did a photo shoot for me, which was just worth its weight in gold, and super incredibly kind of Slash to do that. And so that was the very first one. So with that design, I'll reproduce the design or the artwork that I licensed from Ralph, put it on top of a custom splatter ink art. Ralph did about 20 individual prints of this of his custom splatter ink art specifically for this project. So that gets laminated to the top of the wooden guitar. Then I'll put the artwork, then I'll burn the edges and kind of feather it all in so it looks really apocalyptic and just, you know, like it's been in the car on the way to Las Vegas in the book. And then on the back of the guitar, I have bought a ton of the vintage Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas paperbacks with the yellowed pages, with the pulp paper, and I'll tear passages out of that and decoupage, which glue it all over the back, so you can read these ridiculous little quotes and passages from the book that are all over the back. And then I'll clear coat the whole thing. The inlays are aircraft aluminum that says Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas in the actual font of the book. So it's a pretty authentic piece, you know, and there's 6 different models, and I'm only doing 25 of each print. So there's still a lot left, but they're going.
Very impressive. I noticed that whilst most of them, except the Model T, you've got like tunematic style bridges, none of them have a tailpiece.
You know, that was something that early on I decided I liked, and maybe it's my mind playing tricks on me, that I wanted the strings to go through the body. I tried to combine the best of the features of a Fender versus a Gibson that I liked. I love the tunematic. I used Tone Pros. I believe it's the TP3 locking bridges on every single guitar. Love them, they're great. The guys at Tone Pros, Dwight and Brian, are just awesome and are family to me and have always been so kind and taken care of me, and I love their products. And then with the strings going through the body, I just feel like you get a more of a little bit of a tension and more sustain, and it directly contacts to the body as opposed to having to go through a stop tail piece. Now I will use it. I just did a design, which there again I said that we only have 2 body styles. I did a kind of a one-off of an Explorer style guitar that I had done 2 of for Jared Leto from the band 30 Seconds to Mars. That has a stop tail piece, so that's one of the only designs I'll do that with. Now I will use a wraparound bridge as well, so it's, you know, kind of 2-in-1, so you get the tunematic without having to have the stop tail piece on it.
Well, I see Ozzy, head of security's disappeared.
He's making the rounds of the perimeter of the compound, so we've lost him.
So aside all that welding and trying not to set light to the workshop, working with tone woods is of course the other half of the sonic equation. Do you have favourite woods, and if so, where are they sourced?
You know, I, of course, like a lot of builders, really love Honduran mahogany, and I've got a pretty nice cachet of that stored here, which I was kindly given by a very close friend of mine, Tommy Pearson, who plays in my AC/DC tribute band, the DCs. So if it's a special build, I'll usually use that, just because of the properties of it. It's such a classic tone wood. But I'm not necessarily locked into that, and a lot of times for the more standard models I'll use African mahogany, and I'll go and select the boards. You know, you want something that's dense but not too dense or not too light. You know, you want to have some rigidity to it for the tone. But I've built stuff out of just crazy woods. Like I love found things. Like I've built a guitar out of an old skateboard ramp, for instance, and the neck was made of 2x4s from a Coca-Cola pallet, which is crazy. You know, I feel like if you construct a guitar properly and you go through all the steps and, you know, your tone chamber here, you put a little metal here, that kind of thing, you can pretty much make any wood sound incredible. And one of my favorite stories with that is I had this skateboard ramp with the Coca-Cola pallet neck. I had built a guitar using an old gas can that I peeled apart and laminated to the top of the guitar. Lug nuts for volume knobs, things like that. And it just screamed. It was such a great sounding guitar. And I was over visiting Slash at his rehearsal studio, and I took it just to show him, and he plugs it in and starts playing, and he's like, man, I can't believe you can just make garbage wood sound good, which was quite a compliment. That wasn't his exact words, I don't think, but it was something in that along those lines of, and it just goes to show that if you put the time and the effort into it, you can kind of turn anything into something unique. One of the builds I'm working on right now is for Owen McSwain, who is in the Irish band Midnight Preachers, and he has commissioned one where I am using a chestnut log from a tree that he had cut down recently. They sold the family property, and he had grown this tree, or planted this tree with his grandfather years and years ago. And so he cut that tree down and sent me about a 10-inch diameter, 3-foot long log. And I'm having it kiln dried and properly prepared so that I can make a Telly style guitar for him out of that. So that has this whole history, and that's one of my favorite things, is just almost the story of the wood more so than like a favorite tone wood. So a long-winded answer, but I hope that answers your question.
No, that's good, because when people buy that guitar, they hear that story and they can tell the story on to the next person. It's fantastic. Now, rouse and cheer from everybody, because I have a short question. Moving on from tone woods, what pickups do you use and why?
I have been using Arcane Pickups for several years now. I got to know Rob Timmons from Arcane years ago. I'd met him when he was running Fernandez guitars, believe it or not, that far back. But Rob is just a wizard. He has gone deep into the study of pickups and vintage style pickups. And so one of his main models is called the Triple Clone, and it's modeled after a PAF. And he has done some specific wiring to the ones that I get from him to complement the metal on top of the wood. So it balances out the brightness from the metal and the warmth from the wood, but you get a lot of punch and a lot of warm, beautiful tones out of it. And I'll wire these, it's 2 humbuckers. There's a neck humbucker and a bridge humbucker in most of the models. And I'll wire those to split the coils. So 3-way switch, and then you can push-pull pot and split the coils on the bridge and the neck, and a whole combination of them. So most of the guitars that I build are 2 volumes and 1 tone, so you get a lot of versatility out of it. But I love his pickups. He has a bunch of different styles to choose from, which are just incredible. I can go through his website or say, hey Rob, I'm looking for this, and he'll say, well, how about try this? So he's great to work with.
And again, it's the science and the physics that's behind it, and it's a great choice of pickups too. They really do sound nice. And I see you also engineer your control knobs, which you sell on your website, along with pendants and metal plectrums.
Yes, that was a skill set that I've learned over the past few years of lost wax casting. So, again, going back to Apex, the kind of industrial junkyard for old aerospace stuff, I would go through and dig through these bins and find little gears, in particular ones that were about the size of a volume knob. I would take this, I would send it to my friend LaRouge in Los Angeles, who is, he does a lot of casting of metals and jewelry and things, but he's also a master mold maker. So what you do is you take the mold, he puts it into a cylinder and pours vulcanized rubber around this, which is extremely hot and pressurized. And then he takes a knife and cuts this mold that fits together, which is an art form in itself. It's crazy how the process works. So sends that back to me. I'll shoot pressurized melted wax into it from my wax pot, pop out the wax, and then treat it, make sure there's no air bubbles in it, no mold lines or anything like that. Send it to my other friend, a lot of times, Greg Plant, who is in Huntington Beach, JG Manufacturing, who does a lot of my casting. And he'll cast either white bronze or sterling silver or brass. LaRouche can cast copper. I mean, even 24 karat gold if somebody wanted to go that far. So, but I've had some of the knobs and picks and things cast out of titanium, and even cast iron, so which is crazy. In Japan, they've figured out how to do cast iron, which is extremely hard to cast. But I'll do, the picks, things like that, which you can use as a pendant. You can actually play them, use them to play. And the thing I like about the metal picks is, if you remember, Eddie Van Halen, God rest his soul, played with a copper pick for years. And so you get this just percussive attack to it, which is really unique. And so some people actually play with them. I've sent Vernon Reed a handful of them. Slash has a bunch of them that he really likes. And, so I do it as sort of an aftermarket thing. If somebody wanted to buy them, they could go to the accessories page on McSwainGuitars.com, shameless plug, and, buy a set for your existing guitar if you want. But it goes through a lot of process. You gotta clean the metal, drill it, tap it, and it just is hours. But I absolutely love doing it.
Anybody coming in now watching this, we have to explain this is behind the scenes of Stephen McSwain Guitars. It's incredible. It's all very creative. What's the story behind the wall mounts?
That kind of happened as a happy accident. My wife was wanting a piece of art to go over our fireplace years ago, and I had done one of the first American flag guitars out of metal. And so I was like, well, it's about the size of a flag, the space, so I did a 2-foot by 4-foot American flag with all the metal and the cast stars and things like that. And I took the guitar and laid it on top of it where it just matched perfectly, and the light bulb above my head exploded. So I said, this would be a perfect way to display a guitar in a studio or home, and it just was kind of born that way. And it's funny, my business partner Steve Hall, he affectionately termed it spouse approved. It's evolved over time, not just the flags, but I've found old reclaimed wood, some barnwood and things like that, and then I'll put that onto the wall mount, cut out the shape of the guitar so the guitar hangs there. It just looks like, a guitar on barnwood. You take it off and there is the exact design on the wall mount. So it's either a flag or an oil can, or, we've done some old distressed leather, or it's, the sky's the limit. So it just turns out to be a nice little add-on to be able to display your guitar.
Yeah, it's more than an add-on, because I have seen them in the flesh, and it's beautifully built like the guitars. And like you say, the guitar just sinks in. It's very, very good. Now, you've got some cool guitar players in your artist list now, and rightly so. Some are metal players.
Yeah, I've had a ton of people through the years. Like I've done stuff for George Lynch via ESP, and we became buddies over the years. And John 5 had me modify one of his Telecasters, of course Slash. But one of the ones that I've heard secondhand information from my friend Alan Rosen at Bananas at Large in San Rafael and San Anselmo, California. He had a couple of the flag and wall mount guitars. He had a black flag guitar, and Kirk Hammett wanted to see him. So he took him to Metallica HQ before a rehearsal, and James was there, and Kirk showed up a little later. James saw him, he's like, what's that? So he ends up buying both the red, white, and bullets with the wall mount and the black flag, and has them hanging in his house in Colorado, from what Alan tells me, and kind of scooped him out from under Kirk. So Kirk, if you know this, just give me a call. I'll make you some too.
Most guitars on the shop wall, they play and sound good, and a lot of guitar players know the difference between a single coil, a P90 and a humbucking pickup. So if it's like me, the first impression is from the other side of the room, where my magpie instinct kicks in for, ooh, shiny, shiny, must have, which has attracted me and hundreds of people to your stands at guitar shows around the world.
My whole philosophy is the competition's extremely stiff out there with builders today. And like you said, you can walk into a guitar store and pick up any guitar and it's going to play and sound great. That's where I wanted to take it. That's baseline. You have to make a guitar that is going to play flawless and sound amazing and be versatile. And then you throw the artwork in and the really cool stuff on top and the little knobs and things like that.
Yeah, it's very good. So where can potential customers find out about McSwain guitars, Stephen?
Gosh, I have a few dealers scattered around the globe. Primarily, if you want to check them out, you can come to McSwainGuitars.com. That's the central command hub for all things McSwain guitars. I have a pretty decent presence on Instagram, which is just McSwain Guitars, Facebook, same, and some Twitter, which a lot of times I'll replicate on those 3 platforms. But I've got a store in right outside of Dallas called Guitar Sanctuary that carries some things. There is Houston, which is Infinity Guitars. I have Rebel Guitars in Alabama, which is online. The physical stores are Infinity and Guitar Sanctuary are probably your best bets.
Let's look forward to meeting up again soon, Stephen. Thank you so much for coming on our show and combining a lesson in metalwork with your excellent skills as a guitar luthier.
Well, Lars, thanks for having me, bud. I'm psyched. I hope we get to see each other this year at NAMM and carry on the tradition of our 30-something-year friendship. So, but thank you. I'm honored and flattered that you'd want to hang out and talk and learn a little bit about what I do.
Fantastic. It's a pleasure. Meantime, keep chopping up all those old aeroplanes for the aluminum.
Thanks, Lars.